Okay, great. Thank you and welcome everyone to this special meeting on Monday, June 21st. I would like to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call roll?
With pleasure, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Goethals?
Here.
Councilmember Bappin?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Bonilla?
Here.
Mayor Rodriguez?
Here. Thank you. Due to the health orders in place at this time, we are holding meetings remotely. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of each published agenda. When public comment is announced for the item you wish to comment on, when signed on to Zoom, use the raise your hand feature and you will be called upon at the appropriate time. If calling in via phone, press *9 to raise your hand. And when called upon, press *6. These options for public comment will remain available until I close public comment period for that specific item. Item number 1 in this special meeting is a study session, and it's a citywide traffic management update. And we have Senior Engineer Bethany Lopez here to present to us. Take it away, Bethany.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. One moment here. My name is Bethany Lopez. I'm a Senior Engineer in Public Works. I'm joined this evening by Craig Collum, Traffic Sergeant in the Police Department, and Samantha Weigel, Communications Manager in the City Manager's Office. For the interest of time, or in the interest of time, I will be providing the entire traffic management presentation this evening. However, Samantha and Sergeant Collum will be available following the presentation if any questions arise for them. So for a quick overview, I'm going to discuss an update on the collision data analysis our team has been working on. I'll also provide an update on the traffic data mapping and communications efforts since we discussed them last February.
Bethany,
So I'm going to start off.
Excuse me, Bethany, we need you to reshare. It's not coming across on Zoom.
Thank you. One moment. Is that coming across there?
Yes, it is. Looks great.
Great. Thank you so much. So where I left off, we're going to start talking about the traffic data analysis that we performed. So since our last discussion, we had a much more substantial discussion in November of 2020. You might remember this chart on the right, which we compared collisions by injury type to primary collision factors. In this analysis, we noted that there was an overrepresentation of major injury represented in orange and fatalities represented in red in the pedestrian right-of-way category that's circled there. At that time, we'd indicated that we wanted to use internal data and external data to identify more hotspot locations for pedestrian collisions with the goal of identifying measures or improvements to reduce those major injury and fatal collisions. So what we ended up finding were a handful of top collision locations. However, the additional data didn't get us the several hotspot locations we thought we might have seen. Instead, the data seemed to be more sporadic than originally anticipated, and as shown on this, map. So first, we're going to discuss the top locations that we did find, and then some details about steps that we'd like to take to address those common trends at those locations. And then we'll get into the analysis for the remaining locations and steps for how we want to move forward with addressing those. So as indicated, we identified the top 5 intersections where pedestrian collisions were occurring, 3 of which are on El Camino Real. You'll see that these are ranked by the location with the greatest number of overall collisions. After staff identified these locations, we reviewed the collision reports for each location to identify trends in the types of collisions that were happening. And that's noted in the primary conflict column in the table on the left. For instance, El Camino and 2nd Avenue, which is the 3rd location here, staff identified that westbound left-turning vehicles were the cause of collisions with eastbound pedestrians in the southerly crosswalk. And so that was one location that had a very specific identifiable trend. El Camino and El Camino Real and 22nd, however, was the only location where through traffic was the primary conflict. And so we've outlined a few types of improvements that can be done at each intersection to address their primary conflicts. Most of these involve adding signage and high visibility striping, as well as modifying traffic signal timing to implement leading pedestrian intervals. This is the same type of pedestrian timing installed in the downtown a number of years ago, where the pedestrian signal turns on a few seconds before the vehicle green light is on, which allows the pedestrians a sort of jump start or head start on their crossing. And that's been shown to address or to help reduce pedestrian collisions. Because El Camino Real intersections are Caltrans owned, we have already submitted a request to implement this leading pedestrian interval at these two downtown El Camino locations. We also requested that LPI be implemented at the other 5 downtown locations from Tilton to 5th, the same leading pedestrian interval. Also, while 22nd and El Camino is on this list, Caltrans installed a pedestrian hybrid beacon in 2017. That was late 2017. And we think that in the data shows that that's largely addressed the pedestrian collision conflicts at that area or at that location. So jumping into the data discussion, we first wanted to chart them again by primary collision factor, which provides insight on the main cause of the collisions. These have been separated into 3 categories: non-injury collisions in blue, minor injuries in orange, and major injuries and fatalities in gray. Major injuries can include things like severe lacerations, broken bones, or unconsciousness. Minor injuries is everything that's really not a non-injury or a major injury, such as a bump on the head, bruises, or major lacerations. Minor lacerations. The chart here pretty clearly shows that pedestrian right-of-way collisions, or collisions where motorists failed to yield the right-of-way to a pedestrian, accounts for the majority of pedestrian collisions. In fact, over 75% of all pedestrian collisions are caused by driver violations, and driver violations in this chart is outlined in the yellow box. We also noted the prevalence of fatal and major injury collisions in the pedestrian violation category, which is commonly thought of as jaywalking. And you'll see that major injuries and fatalities comprise about 20% of this category, compared to only about 10% in the pedestrian right-of-way violation category. And so I just wanted to make one more note about this distinction. Again, pedestrian right-of-way violations are where the driver is at fault. Pedestrian violations is where the pedestrian was found to be at fault. So we wanted to take a deeper look at these 2 top primary collision factors. And so we reviewed the location of where these pedestrian collisions were occurring with respect to the intersection. They were classified as at the intersection in blue, from 0 to 100 feet from the intersection in orange, from 100 feet to 200 feet from the intersection in gray, and beyond 200 feet from the intersection in yellow. For pedestrian right-of-way collisions, which is graphed on the left, the majority of both minor injuries and fatal and major injuries occurred at the intersection. While some occurred away from the intersection, the clear majority was at the intersection. For pedestrian violations, again, what's commonly thought of as jaywalking, many happened at the intersection, but there was quite a few more that happened a lot further from the intersection. That's pretty intuitive, though, considering most people think of jaywalking as not happening, at a crosswalk or at a specifically designated area for pedestrians. However, we are seeing that the majority of fatal and major injury collisions are happening from 0 to 200 feet from the intersection. This is interesting because we're noting that it's not necessarily in the middle of a roadway segment. It's actually very close to where it might be thought of that a pedestrian would cross. And so it's almost like they're shortcutting a crosswalk. One thing to note there is that there is a bill going through at the state level that would decriminalize jaywalking. If it's passed, then enforcement may not be an option to help curtail these types of violations. And so there's other types of measures that we'll need to look into if this is something that we're looking to curtail. And then lastly, because we saw that intersections were where most pedestrian collisions occurred, we reviewed collisions by type of intersection control. 4 different categories here listed are uncontrolled, one-way and two-way stops, all-way stops, and signalized intersections. Uncontrolled intersections are where there's no stops, yields, or traffic signals. These usually only occur where traffic volumes are very low. One or two-way stops are frequent, where a lower volume street meets a higher volume street, and where usually only the lower volume street has a stop. All-way stops have stops on every approach and would occur where both streets have somewhat higher volumes. And signalized intersections, as described, are controlled by traffic signals. And signalized intersections generally have much higher volumes. In this chart, we graph the total number of collisions and fatal and major collisions by each intersection control. And you can see that the majority of these are happening at signalized intersections, about 80 collisions over the last 4 years. So when we reviewed these on a map, and we can see that signalized intersections actually comprise a fairly small amount of intersections overall throughout the city compared to the number of two-way and all-way stop controlled intersections. In this map, signalized intersections are designated in yellow, and all the pedestrian collisions are designated in the smaller blue dots. However, because most pedestrian collisions are happening at, or what we're seeing is that most are happening at signalized intersections, it leads us to the thought that roadways with higher volumes have a higher propensity for pedestrian collisions. Also shown on the map is collector streets in light gray and arterials in black. These roadways are designated as such because they carry higher traffic volumes. And you'll notice on this map that most pedestrian collisions are occurring in these areas, which leads to us needing to review, these locations with higher volumes. And so, like I mentioned, these are all some of the risk factors that we've identified in the pedestrian collision realm. A lot of them are driver violations, and we're seeing that a lot of them happen at intersections and at higher volume roadways. So where do we go from here? This method of identifying risk factors in order to identify improvements aligns really closely with the goals of a local roadway safety plan. An LRSP, which you'll hear me refer to it as, is really the current best practice at the state and federal level for how we address traffic safety. And it uses our collision data and other industry data to provide a proactive approach to address safety, meaning we don't need to wait for a collision to occur or for an intersection to rise to a top collision location for us to make improvements there. We've also received grants from, a state grant to complete a local roadway safety plan for our city. So using this list of identified risk factors, the goal of the LRSP will be to identify improvement projects, also referred to as safety countermeasures, that can be implemented across the city. An example of this is from one of the top collision locations where we identified earlier that El Camino and 2nd, where left-turning vehicles were the cause of pedestrian collisions at that intersection. Where rather than only making improvements at that intersection, we would identify intersections with similar characteristics and recommend that similar improvements also be made there in order to prevent similar types of collisions. This type of plan is also required for us to qualify for HSIP funds, which will be probably a key source of funding when we're proposing these broad improvements. So after receiving authorization this past May, we're planning to move forward with releasing an RFP. We do intend that it'll take about a year to complete, after which it'll be incorporated in the Complete Streets Plan. So moving on to the traffic data and mapping effort. Since we last discussed it in February, we've staff, specifically Richie Pierce, have updated the map to include both pedestrian and bike specific maps. And then we also plan to release an age demographics map this summer and citation map later in the fall. You can see here the image of the pedestrian map that was just released. It functions very similarly to the other released maps. However, it only shows the pedestrian involved collisions. You'll see the data on the right-hand side here that shows up when you select one of these collisions. And then similar to the pedestrian map is a bike-specific map, and it functions much the same way. Last but not least, I wanted to touch on communications and the efforts that have been completed since this past February. So communication staff have kept up with messaging on the forefront of our city's social media platforms, including Nixle, and they're always seeking opportunities like the Recology bill mentioned here. I'm not going to go through all of these items in detail, but note that staff, specifically Janine Luna and Kelly Benz, have taken numerous opportunities to discuss pedestrian safety in the community and have reached out to thousands of people through our Safe Streets San Mateo brand. Also, opportunities often arrive to incorporate the Safe Streets messaging into other programs, such as those that are shown on this slide. And our staff always jump on those opportunities when they're available. And then lastly, we did want to say that it's always helpful for council and members of the public to share our social media posts when you see them. It just helps to get the word out. So summary and next steps is to transition to the local roadway safety plan as our next steps for our data analysis. We plan to continue to refine the traffic data maps, continue to provide messaging through the Safe Streets San Mateo platform and branding. In return, we've made substantial progress on the LRSP. And this wraps up the presentation. As mentioned, Samantha Weigel and Sergeant Craig Collum are here to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. Excellent presentation. Do we have any questions from council? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, I had a,
go ahead. Yeah.
You can go ahead. I didn't see your hand raised, sorry.
It's okay. I had a question, Bethany, about the sort of the breakout between pedestrian and bicycle collisions. And I was wondering, when you're looking at prioritizing the areas of improvement, are you overlaying both the pedestrian and bicycle collisions to surface our top 5 priority areas? Or do you see, like, help me understand, like, is it important to parse out the different types of collisions because you feel like there are different strategies to mitigate risk and design? Or I guess I'm trying to understand why we would take that approach instead of a combined lens.
Yeah, I think absolutely we would want to separate those out. What we've found in reviewing both pedestrian and bicycle collisions is that the primary collision factors are often quite different. There certainly are and is some overlap there, but pedestrian involved collisions generally happen in very specific spaces where bicycle collisions would happen in a different space. For instance, a lot of bicycle collisions unfortunately happen as a result of, say, bicycles going the wrong way on the street. And so the type of messaging or solution to that sort of issue would be completely different than it would be for addressing pedestrian collisions at an intersection.
Thank you. That helps me understand. And just as a baseline, this is excellent work. Thank you so much.
I had a question for all the stats that you presented. It's mostly like a point in time, right? Like it's what we're kind of seeing in this past period. Do you have any information on whether or not you feel like things are getting worse or getting better, or any trends?
Yeah, certainly. We actually did look at collisions over time. We were finding that from 2017 to 2019, our overall pedestrian right-of-way violations, so where the vehicle was at fault, was actually increasing. During 2020, it did drop pretty dramatically. Going back to the conversation about traffic volumes, there may be a correlation there between having less volume on the roadways compared to the pedestrians, which may have led to that drop in 2020. But we were seeing an increase prior to that.
Thank you. And the other question I had, I know that I believe that one of council's priorities that we talked about in January was perhaps looking into reducing speed limits, definitely by schools, but perhaps beyond schools if we could. We were going to look into that. Do you feel that that is going to be able to help in some of these areas? And did your analysis look at whether or not a lot of these collisions and accidents happen during or close in proximity to schools?
Yeah, so we did look at where the collisions were happening. We are finding that the majority of them are happening at or near signalized intersections, or at or near higher volume roadways such as arterials and collectors, like I was mentioning. We do have some schools that are fronting those types of areas, but the collision data wasn't specifically lending to the fact that these are school-age pedestrians. However, I will note, I think we've discussed internally that we are looking at the effort to reduce speeds in and around schools already. And there's going to be some findings that need to be made for that. I think that's something that we're planning to bring back to council.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before I open up public comment? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. I'd like to open up public comment. Now would be the time to raise your hand on Zoom or use the call-in feature, and we'll get to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our first speaker is Rayan Matashami.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Motashemi. Thank you to staff for the presentation. I wanted to make a couple of comments on the presentation, and also I just wanted to say, Mayor Rodriguez, I support looking at reducing vehicle speeds, because I think one important thing to take into account, like reducing a speed limit and reducing vehicle speeds, reduces the severity of crashes when it comes to if these crashes were to happen. And I think that's an important thing. Even so, like we should also be looking at how do we reduce the severity of crashes, which do tend to happen at signalized intersections or places where there are heavier car volumes, as mentioned. I also wanted to bring up a point. I'm concerned as well about the enforcement side of these things. I think that enforcement can play a role. I'm concerned that it often disproportionately impacts pedestrians who are the victims, pedestrians and bicyclists who are the victims of and have more to lose, quote unquote, when it comes to a collision between a car and a pedestrian or a bicyclist, because I noticed that 75% of the collisions were due to driver fault, but I'm unsure and would definitely like to see data on the enforcement and citations that were issued based on a variety of factors, including race, as well as the category of the person, as in like pedestrian, bicyclist, or motorist, because I'm wondering if the vast majority of collisions are caused by drivers, is our enforcement targeting drivers who are the bigger source of the problem, as the data suggests? So that's an important thing I think would be important to look at when it comes to enforcement. In general, I also support asking for LPIs on El Camino. And I think that another reason that there's a lot of high, that the width of the road might also lead to issues when it comes to, or greater chances of collisions. So I was wondering if the greater chance of collisions might in any way also map to wider roads, which would also be something that I would encourage the city staff to look at. Does reducing the width of the road increase pedestrian safety and bicyclist safety? So all in all, I support what's going on. Thank you for taking this on. And yes, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we have two other speakers. First is Drew.
Hello there. Good afternoon still, technically. I just want to thank the kind of all that's represented here doing the presentation, the traffic engineering department, the public works in general. The courtyard's not here, but they were involved with some stuff, and the police where I'm at. There was an ongoing, some challenges, and over a number of years, and yes, it was years, but that's fine. This was never a crisis. And then we had COVID too, which impacted things, but we kind of there was a stepwise thing to try to make an improvement in some safety issues where I'm at. And overall, in the long term, we got progress, and ultimately there was some engineering stuff done, which ultimately led to the police, us not needing to call the police as regularly to deal with some stuff versus in the beginning. And it was just a great team effort across multiple departments of the city and just kind of chipping away at the problem. You know, it was never a number one crisis or anything. It was just something kind of in the background, kind of got worked. And just want to thank the traffic engineering team, the courtyard, kind of the paint sign crew, and the police, because they would come out. They've come out a lot of different times to deal with things and stuff. And so now they're doing it less because we've got an engineering solution that improved things. And it wasn't a high dollar issue or anything, but it was just took time, took effort, and thank you to all involved.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Adam Lorraine.
Good evening, council and staff. I really hope you could hear me. I'm on a phone watching you on Zoom, so I want to say first that I'm speaking as a private resident of San Mateo, not as a sustainability and infrastructure commissioner. These are my opinions. But first, shout out to the city clerk and staff for making it possible for me to engage in this way in this meeting. I was hoping to be home to watch, but I popped a tire on my bike on the way to the train station. I missed my train, but I still got to see some of the presentations. So that was very good. I'll just say +1 to what Ryan mentioned in his comments. And thank you very much for this presentation.
We have no other speakers.
Thank you. I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to council for any further questions or additional comments. Who would like to start?
I can go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, please, Deputy Mayor Bonilla.
Yes, I want to thank also everybody for working hard on this. And I feel that there's probably more work to be done. I'm glad to see that much data has been gathered, and there's now the ability to make measurable improvement based on data that's been gathered. But I want to say I have an issue with understanding the presentation. I'm sorry, but it just went along so fast, and it was hard to comprehend the charts and listen to everything that was being said. And I mean, I'm pretty good at this. I do it a lot. But there were charts that had vertical charts, and then the writing was the other way around, and I was turning my head and trying to. I just want to ask if we could actually spend a little more time making sure the charts contain things like legends, and that we go just a little bit slower. I think that many more people would benefit from the presentation if we could do that. Otherwise, I'm really happy with the progress we're making, and I want to express gratitude to everybody. Thank you all very much.
If I may add, I agree with perhaps there might be more keys in the presentation, but just to Bethany's defense, I think that we have a packed agenda, and it's really difficult to kind of figure out the perfect balance between having a very long presentation that takes up all of our time, and then we don't have time for the other issues, versus a concise presentation. And I personally, just to throw out another thought, I thought it was about the right length, and we can follow up with you if we have additional questions on the side. So just want to throw that out there. Any other comments? Councilmember Lee, please.
Well, I appreciate all the work that went into this, and I wanted to underscore my support for the study of the reduced speeds around the schools. Look forward to that coming back to us. And then Bethany, I was wondering, just to confirm, isn't reducing the street widths or narrowing street widths part of the analysis done for complete streets? That's one of the strategies that is considered in complete streets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be, largely a part of the pedestrian realm conversation, and how to reduce crosswalk widths.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure that was surfaced for the public. Thank you.
And also just kind of the piggyback on what I just said, we could, the way the presentation is structured, Deputy Mayor Bonilla, if you have additional questions or you'd like to go back to a slide, we can definitely do that. If you want to, we do have a little bit more time if you want to dig into it a little bit more. You're on mute.
I'm not sure we have that much time. It's okay. I just would like to look into maybe trying to do it a little differently in the future. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I thought it was a great presentation, Bethany. I appreciate all the work, and also Samantha and others. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing progress. On this, it's very difficult to to make improvements on things that we're not measuring very precisely. And I feel like we're making very good strides in terms of getting that data so we can act upon it and meet what everybody's goal is here, and that's to reduce these accidents and make it safer for cyclists and pedestrians. And we have Councilmember Pappen wants to chime in.
Just one thing. One of the things that I liked about the program is that you're trying to have, if you will, model sort of hazards, and then working from that model to perhaps improve other intersections that have similar circumstances before an accident might occur, but we know, there's some treachery to this type of design for a particular intersection. So I'm looking forward to that because it's a way of sort of streamlining the process. And I think the public really wants to know, hey, does that intersection that I've always found treacherous, does that fall within one of those ones you're going to make safer? So you're the compartmentalizing and modeling there, I think, is going to be effective in the future. So I thank you for that.
I agree with that comment. I was surprised to not see Saratoga and Hillsdale on that chart, because I always hear that that's like the worst intersection, and to not see it on a presentation was a little bit surprising. I know you're probably taking top 5 and that might have been 6, but everybody, I think, has their own region that they're looking at, as Councilmember Pappen just said, and I think they want to make sure that we got that on our radar screen as well, but I know we do. Okay, with that, we will close this item, and we are going to move into closed session now with, let's see, closed session item number 2 is conference with real property negotiators. And then we also have closed session number 3, legal counsel, existing litigation, workers' compensation. And I just wanted to see if there's anybody that wanted to comment on that from the public before we move into closed session.
I have one hand up.
Okay.
Drew?
Hello again. I'm a little confused on which property, so my short public comment might not be quite apropos, but there's been presentations around some city property around the railroad tracks in the downtown area. And I just want to encourage, beg, plead that if that at all involves the space on either side of the tracks, do not allow like Railroad Avenue to exist. Don't give that for development. We need space on both sides of the track to do grade separation through downtown. We need some right of way. So don't well, no one needs that land, and then 30 years from now, it costs us millions of dollars to demo some building to get the space. We just need space next to the track. So again, I don't know if the properties you're talking about are apropos to that. I couldn't quite tell with the agenda item. So that's my ask when you're negotiating on stuff. Leave space for grade step through downtown. Thank you.
No further speakers.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment, and we're going to move to closed session right now. Thank you.